Welcome to Roho Rest Hour, your ultimate destination for rest, peace, and power. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Majors, and every episode is dedicated to one thing: helping women slow down, let go of the hustle, and embrace the flow. It's time to rest. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Roho Rest Hour, where we talk about the intersections of rest, peace, and all the different aspects of life. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Majors, and today we are diving deep into the emotional terrain so many of us walk in quietly, and that's grief. I'm not having this conversation alone, though. I am joined by the incredible Michelle Haughton, grief coach, speaker, and founder of When Grief Talks. So this is the first of a three-part series, and we'll be talking about grief and healing and the intersections of rest and how they all work together. But in this powerful conversation, we're unpacking kind of this weight of the invisible grief that we carry, the toll of trauma, and how our communal rest can become a real path to healing. So I'm super excited about this episode. It's real, it's raw, and it's rooted in truth that healing is not a solo journey. So sit back and relax and hope that you really get a lot of today's episode. Michelle Haughton, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. I am excited about having this conversation, and I love how you really shine the light on. We're talking about grieving in silence and inward. And so I'm happy to be a part of the conversation, as that's something, unfortunately, but fortunately, that I specialize in. So I'm ready to have this deep conversation.
You know, this is really interesting. I remember once there was this pastor that said, either you teach that which you've been tested, or you will be tested on that which you teach. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that you are teaching what you've already been tested. And we're just going to assume that you passed. Look, you got the tests. And what's that? What makes you stronger? What doesn't? You're here. You're stronger. We got the lesson. Thank you, God. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when we talk about grief, so many of us, I think we think of an incident or situation, but many of us are grieving the end of what we feel was our country or our safety or the future that we thought we were living into. And so we're grieving in a lot of different ways. So I just didn't want to discount the kinds of ways that we grieve that are that are obvious and subtle, right? But this is a collective kind of thing that's happening right now. And I just wanted to name that. With that said, let's hop into it. I want to start out with, should I call it grief story, or what is your story related to your own grief? Can you share a little bit about what brought you to this line of work?
You know what? Once I understood the definition of what grief is and how it correlates with life experiences, it just made me realize that it's just my life story. And it really did help me identify and start understanding how to process this thing called grief, because my life story, it was never spoken about. And that's literally, I always say, was the key. So can I share the definition of grief before we hop in?
Please, let's do it.
Yeah, so grief, by definition, is the emotional response to losing something that we love. So once I realized that, then it was like, oh, we love so many things in our life. You mentioned the security of being in our country and things that we've thought. And now we're seeing that that's not the way it may appear right now. And now we have lost something that we loved. And then I started to look back at all of my experiences. That was the other thing that made me realize, oh, I need to understand this in order to heal this, because then I understood what beliefs were. Beliefs are the way that we interpret the world. It's our thoughts, how we perceive things. And then when I realized that our beliefs stems from our experiences, wait a second. So if grief is losing, is my emotional response to losing something that I love, I go and that's the correlation. And then emotion is energy in motion. So if this emotion to losing something that I love, I have this energy that I'm feeling that I need to express and process. And if I'm not getting the guidance and understanding of how, then I am stuck on this wheel. So once I understood those things, then I looked at my life. I was raised in a household where children were to be seen and not heard. I grew up being told that I was the child that was not to be even thought of. You know, my mother was fixed. She's already had 3 children. She said, you were not even in my dreams. I wasn't even planning on having you. And I still became a reality. My mother and father were into drugs, and it just wasn't something that was in the books for them. And that was my birth story. My mother and father had a volatile relationship. My mother ended up killing my father in a domestic violence situation. No one ever spoken to me about those situations. So that was my introduction to what grief was. My mother then married my stepfather, who happened to be my dad's best friend. And I am a child in this environment with adult ideas, adult anger, adult real raw feelings of something that was real. And the way that I found out that my mother actually really had a hand in the killing of my father was through a punishment, and it was by mistake. So if I didn't even discover that by being a really nosy child and reading paperwork, I just happened to come along and find my father's death, the paperwork from the police department. And I could pinpoint certain words, and then I asked my mom. But what that experience did, from that moment as a child, I developed strong anger. And that anger just was like, I was angry at this person. Father's Day, I was so angry about Father's Day. I loved the experience. I had a stepfather, but I was so mad. And then I wasn't able to express my anger. So at a young age, I started to bite my arm because I was like, I can't say anything to my parents, you know, because then I'd get in trouble. I'll get popped, you know. So here I was, exactly as you described, grieving in silence as a child. So I conditioned myself to suffer without being able to express, okay, I don't understand how to process the loss of my dad. And then that transition through my adolescence, it transitioned to me being a young adult and then an adult. And eventually I said, okay, I have to really decide what's going on here. You know, I understand that I have a trigger of anger, you know, and one of the things that my mom had a real good habit of doing is whenever I did something that reminded her of my dad, it was always something negative, you know, like, oh, there's that anger. You remind me of your dad. So I've never seen a picture of my dad. However, the only thing that I was in resemblance in kind of comparison to were all the negative things. So there were moments where I'm just like, well, if I'm going to be that negative thing, then I'm just going to just be like my dad, right? Because I didn't have anything else to compare it to. But when the transition like kind of shifted from me just living in that response, in that anger, I had my own children. And then I started to kind of see history repeating itself. You know, that anger that I was seeing in myself as a child, I was now doing it as an adult. The difference was I have these little eyes looking back at me, and I just didn't want that to be little Michelle. So suffering in silence and grieving in silence was no longer an option, because now I'm teaching this next generation how to do the same thing. So that's when I really started doing the deep work of, okay, why do I feel this way? And can I be open enough to just ask the questions?
Well, you said a lot. Okay, so let me try to go back because there was a lot that was said here. That piece about conditioning yourself to suffer, right? There are so many ways that we are conditioning ourselves to suffer. We are taking it in, and we're taking it in for a number of reasons. One, because that's all we know, right? If it took me a long time to figure out when I'm not fighting for something, who am I? When I'm not defending myself, who am I? So when so much of our life is framed in this traumatic situation, we just become conditioned to navigating trauma and navigating pain as opposed to living life, right? And so one of the ways you said where you were like biting yourself because that was the only way that you could just be with that level of pain. Can you talk about some different ways that, may not be so obvious that we kind of do this? I want to say self-punishment, but because we're conditioned to suffer, can you talk a little bit more about that in different ways that it might manifest?
People pleasing, validating other people's opinions, feelings above your own. I did that a lot because I felt they were more valuable, whether it be in their desires, pain, it didn't even matter. It could be down to a meal. They were more valuable than myself. And oftentimes you can kind of see if you fit that category, if you just apologize consistently for just being present, being there. If you're in the line, oh, I'm sorry, I'm in your way. It's just, you're constantly apologizing for just being human. But that is a response. And I myself also fell into that category as well, constantly apologizing for just being surely a person that was existing in a space. And that is something, once you start seeing that, like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Why am I apologizing for just looking at cards in the store? Where does this stem from? And it allows us to really just validate and say, you know what, in this moment, I have every right to look at this card, no different than someone walking down. And it's just that moment of validating ourselves. And sometimes we have to do that because our little person, our little Michelle, might not have been validated as a child. So we have to parent our younger selves in that moment because our younger self is showing up. So that is something that I've seen that's not as strenuous, if that makes sense.
I have been obsessed with this, what is his name? Andrew Bustamante. Andrew Bustamante is a former CIA operative. And he talks about his time in the CIA, and he talks about how, so now what he does is he teaches business, how to use some of those things that he learned in the CIA for everything from reading people to negotiating to like all of these things. And one of the things that I just have been just clinging on to lately, because I see it everywhere, is this difference between perception and perspective. And what you've been talking about is that you see the world through this perception. And that perception is wounds, trauma, family of origin, backstory, all of these experiences that make us see this. And we hold this as truth, not a truth, but the, So my newest favorite thing is your color glasses. Girl, I got them in every color. Better get you some. And so this feeling of being able to only seeing the world through this perception. But he says, but once you have perspective, it's like perception plus context. And when you are negotiating with somebody or in conflict with somebody, the idea is that whoever has the perspective wins the day, because they are able to see beyond. They are able to see that person in a different way. They're able to see the situation in a different way. And so when I heard you say your little ones that were looking at you and holding you as, okay, I guess this is who I'm going to be in life, or this is who I should be in life, that kind of changed your perspective. That brought perspective into how you saw your own trauma. Was there is that fair to say? And two, were there other things that changed or affected your perspective of, I better do something different, or that trauma happened then, but that doesn't define me, right? So what were some of the things that helped you change your perspective other than your babies staring you in the face?
One, I didn't like my coping mechanisms. I didn't like that I always had to have some help, whether it be alcohol or whatever it may be, for me to be able to speak my truth unapologetically. And I didn't like that I couldn't gauge my response until I got super angry. Like, I was like, I shouldn't have to be able to articulate my feelings until I got too angry. And then that anger, I knew that anger is it's a stage of grief. So then I just tracked it back. I just allowed myself to be curious. But what really allowed me to dive down deep, because you were talking about perspective, is when you're going inward, that word belief. One day I looked at the word belief and I realized that right in the middle of that word is the word lie.
Oh my God.
And then I looked into the definition of belief. And the definition is what you perceive to be true, is your statement of truth. And then when I realized that your beliefs stem from your experience, well, if I for so long as a child felt that I was the cause of something, even though that was not true, if I believed that and I told myself that to be a statement of truth, then my thoughts and ideas and my perception of the world is going to correlate with that belief system. And then I realized, I was like, oh, so I can reverse this? I have that power? And that's when I was like, well, let me start looking at everything that I once thought was my fault and look at it from a different perspective. And what that allowed me to do, if we're talking about my childhood, was give me the courage to ask those tough questions with my mom and say, this is how I felt because of this. And sometimes it was received well. And oftentimes I have a Black mom who doesn't like to talk about her past. She's been that way. So as she has gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more. But what it did was allow me to hear it, to see the situation from a different perspective, and then realize that some of the things that I was holding on to, that I was grieving, that I was angry about, that I can process it and let it go. But it was those correlations, but I was holding on to it so dearly because I wasn't forgiving, because I didn't have the answers, but I was repeating it.
Now I don't even want to use the word believe anymore. I'm like, it's a lie. But I've always thought that a lot of us don't lean in and confront that trauma because I think we're afraid of our own rage, our own pain of that situation, the amount of work it will take to release it, heal it, right? Who got time for that? Who has time to stop? And Jill Scott said, I don't have time, my schedule for a breakdown. And this is an anticipated breakdown, right? Like when I go in here, I know I'm going to be feeling this or whatever the case may be. I think we just resist it because it is painful and it is hard. And it could take us out if we actually sit with the experience of that trauma. So as a coach, how do you encourage people to lean into that pain, confront it, stare it down, right? And be like, you're not going to take my future too. You took a lot of my past. You're not taking my future. There's a certain resolve in that, but how did you get there? How do you coach somebody through that?
One, the reality is it doesn't matter what lane you choose to be on. Every lane's going to be hard. If you want to continue to live the life that's bringing you hardship, I can guarantee you every person that I've coached can give me 100 things presently that they're experiencing in that moment that is hard. I think what we miss is the healing journey could be hard, harder, and hardest. And I often speak about this. The hard part is going through the experience the first time, living through that experience. That is the hard part. The harder part is when you wake up the next day from that experience that you just went through and realize that the world continues to spin. And there may be some people that are concerned about what happened to you that day, but the majority of the world continues to spin. And now you have to figure out how to be in the world when you just went through this experience. That is the harder part. And the hardest part is having the courage to now go back to that hard experience that you went through. Talk about it. Take what you need presently, the lesson, and then let go of the things that no longer serve you and give that forgiveness and release. That's the hardest, because now you're going to have to go back and do the work. But when you do it from a place of being curious and not judgmental, you're not going to be able to do a lot of things from the place of being judgmental. You're not going to be able to heal. The body doesn't heal that way. It's just not going to work. But when you're curious, then you're able to do some things. I'm not saying you have to be right. Just be curious. How many things have you been able to do in your life by just being curious about it? And that's where we need to get. So when I'm coaching someone and they're saying, well, Michelle, I don't know. Well, I understand you're feeling that way. But if we look at it from a curious perspective, if you could do without limitations, and just being curious about it. If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't. What did you learn from it? Would you do it? And would it align with what you want in your life? Because we carry on a lot of the disappointment, all the guilt, and these are low vibrational feelings and emotions. So when we look at, okay, if you can replace that guilt with joy, what does that look like for you? And then focus on that. That's just those small, consistent steps. It's not about creating a mountain in one day. We're not going to be able to do it. But if we promise to be inconsistently consistent with our healing journey and giving ourselves that grace and loving ourselves through the discovery and the healing, because we're going to discover so much, especially when you're pulling back the layers of our healing process, you're going to discover so much about things. And allow yourself to do that and treat it like a baby. Don't let everyone into your healing journey, because there's naysayers and everything. Don't let everyone into your healing journey. Allow yourself to be vulnerable with yourself in a safe space so you can actually start healing from it. We need to get back to allowing ourselves to be vulnerable in our, some people have prayer closets where they cry and they ugly cry. We got to get back to that and let it feel normal. Right? Don't say you're doing something wrong, and that's what I coach on. And then I help them with the tools and modalities to make sure that they can figure out what processes work best for them so they can apply it to anything that happens in their life, because life is going to continue to happen. Yeah. But you want to make sure that you show up the way that you want to show up for those situations.
We're talking about judgment, and you talked about earlier about feeling like it's my fault. And so how do we not judge ourselves when we haven't overcome and actually changed the narrative or the perspective, maybe whatever it is, that thing that happened to you, it wasn't your fault. I mean, there's, you hear stories all the time of people are like, well, yeah, this happened to me because I should not have eaten the extra cookie. I mean, it's just like all these things that we internalize. It's I got it honestly, or the abuse should have, whatever it is that we own, when it is not our fault. It is not, and especially things when we're like 8 or 9 years old and we're actually owning decisions that adults make at this, all of these things. is there I know there's not a step-by-step, everybody's different, but how do you change that? It's not your fault. You did not ask for this. You did not deserve it. How do you change that?
I will tell you my experience. Once I started to do the work with myself, and then I started having the conversations with my mom, I realized that there are situations as a child that I didn't realize. I would ask my mom, well, why did you stay? Why did you do this? Or why were you angry about this? And why did you always choose work? And why did you come home and you just wanted to drink? And then why were you so mad at me? And then finally, my mom just opened up and said, your dad was a mean asshole to me, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. And she thought that she was protecting me this whole time. And so when I had my own children, what that taught me, I was just going to be honest with my kids before they come to me. So I would say, you know what, the things that I learned, and they obviously have been in situations, they live in the same household, they can feel it. So I would have the conversations. You know, I remember when. Sometimes they remembered the days and sometimes they didn't. But I opened up the conversation and allowed myself to be vulnerable because I understand and understood that I was carrying on a lot of things that they didn't realize. But I also wanted to free them for carrying it on in their lives and let them know they weren't the cause of it. Now, sometimes the response was great. And sometimes, you know, I have 3 kids and each one of them have different personalities. My oldest, who is now 22, he's now coming back and saying, I remember when you did this and you meant it in this way, but this is how it impacted me. And that hurt me. And then I open up that safe space to receive his pain and then hold him. And if it was something that I didn't understand, because the way that I don't want to blame myself nor anyone else for tools they didn't have growing up. And I am okay with saying I didn't have those tools then. I understand now. And I think by opening those conversations, it helps, because we all are living this life for the first time. We're all going to make mistakes. We don't know. We do the best that we can. And sometimes someone asks for forgiveness. And however, we are all living it the best way that we can for the first time, and have a little bit of that empathy.
So 2 things I heard from that. One is, it's interesting as adults. I don't have children, but I have, you know, nieces, nephews, but you know, like I talk to their mothers, my friends. And one of the things that I hear them kind of come back to is, I don't want my children to have to caregive for me. When we don't move in life in a way that's free and liberated, they see our brokenness and they do that. We go into protection. And next thing we know, we become these, you know, chronic caregivers where we can't allow people to have their own experiences. So we learn very early to see pain and move into it and manage it in a certain way and take it away from people and then own it. And then, right. And that's when we become now prisoners to that piece where you're just kind of going as an adult and you're trying to figure it out and your heart is broken and you don't know that you're putting that on your kids. Like I was that person where I had to then I had to shield my mom and do all these other things that I felt that I could see and I did not want her to hurt. Right. So that's the first thing. I think we put our children inadvertently in these positions where they then become caregivers. The second thing is, you know, my mom had me when she was 21. Think about what I was doing when I was 21. I didn't know. look, 31, I was still trying to figure it out. Right. And so
Right.
like, and 41, don't play. But we hold our parents to these standards in these ways that is so unrealistic. Right.
Mhm.
And so I think that piece that you're talking about, Michelle, is that vulnerability. You lean in and say, hey, I didn't get it right all the time, or I'm gonna get ahead of this before you can say it, I'm gonna own it. Or even if you don't get ahead of it, you give them space to acknowledge, like, I said that, right? So these
Mhm.
pieces around, one, not being able to, or putting our burdens on them in these ways that we don't really know what we're creating, and two, that piece of how, when I look at my mom now, I'm like, at 21, and then I looked at our family of origin. I looked at her father, and I'm like, oof. Then I looked at
Mhm.
all the other. There was no way she was going to be a perfect mother, right? And
Mhm.
so I think as humans or as children, we need to like start figuring out where we can find that grace. Now, I'm not saying that people get abused and grow up in very harsh conditions. And you have to navigate, that's your journey. But there are a lot of times where some of the stuff was, I wanted her to come to my games more, or I wanted her to say, I love you more, or to hug me more, or acknowledge this or that. And we really hold them kind of hostage and prisoner to these ideals that they didn't have the tools or the resources to do anyway. So what is your thoughts about any of those in terms of how you walk people through, like, how to release folks who in their own brokenness did what they did?
Boundaries.
Oof,
I love a good
not the B
boundary.
word, girl, not the B word. Ooh.
And this boundaries is something that even in my own personal experience, my mother doesn't like, people that I love don't like. But boundaries, once I realize that I can use them, if you're going to be saying no to something. So either
Mhm.
you're going to be saying no to yourself or you're going to be saying no to them. You're going to be saying no to something. So with that being said, when you're thinking about your emotional well-being, when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired,
Mhm.
and you are now in the crossroads, it's either you or me. And in
Mhm.
this moment, I'm choosing me, then what boundary do you need to create to allow you to continue to be walking in your alignment?
Mhm.
I'm not worried about other people in this moment. It's about when we are working together, what is your intent and what is your purpose?
Mhm.
One of the things that I had to even coach myself and my clients through is creating boundaries when you know that you're going to upset someone, whether it be your mom, your grandmother, or your father, and holding steadfast to those boundaries.
That's right. Mhm.
It's not easy,
Mm-mm.
but again, it's about what are you willing to say no? Who are you honoring? And I have a whole week where we just talk about honoring. Are you going to
Mm.
honor yourself? Are you going to honor them?
Hmm.
And it's freeing. To me, I feel it's liberating and it's freeing.
Mhm. Mhm. So many things to that. Yeah, I'm like, thank goodness it's a three-part series, because oh my goodness. So next time we're going to be talking about our trauma teaches us how to fight.
Mm,
Resting and healing teaches us how to how to just start that healing process, right? And so how do we make that transition as natural born just fighters? And you know, specifically for Black women, this idea of always having to fight. That's why I don't like this idea of rest is resistance, rest is radical, rest is revolutionary, rest can just, all of that just puts all of this harshness to
mhm,
something that should be about letting go, right? And so this idea of how do we really rest? And when I say rest, people think, oh, sitting on a couch or walking to a beach or sitting. No, when I say rest, I mean that spiritual piece where we're just we're resting our spirits from so much going on. We're resting long enough to be able to say, I'm okay. And
Absolutely.
if I'm okay, then all the things that have happened to me through this part, I can look at those things as part of this moment of being okay, right? All of the stuff that's happened. And so I'm so present to how you're talking about being able to own where you are and who you are in the moment as a means for setting your children up for success, as a means of releasing people from all the judgment, because we talk about judging ourselves, but then we judge other people who didn't have the tools or resources, understand the skills, the nothing
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do anything better than they did. That is so liberating for them, sure, but it's liberating for me, because that doesn't mean that you were just this horrible person. It was personal. You attacked me. It means I can have compassion and grace, because I don't know what it's like to be a 21-year-old with a child in Chicago and then moving to Africa and then coming back here and having a daughter and then moving back to Africa. Like, I can't even imagine, right? So there's a place that now I can kind of sit with, to say, God, that must have been hard. And I'm sorry that was your life. So last thing before I kind of want to move on a little bit, because we got to come back for part 2, is this idea that we, in particular as Black women, we just carry our grief so stealth and quiet, and just we hold it all, and we don't feel it's good to talk about it. It serves any purpose to talk about it. You said your mom's like, I'm not trying to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is it about Black women in particular that we don't go to therapists? We don't talk about this in open spaces, so that when Michelle tells her story, I can go, oh, me too. So you feel like you're just all alone because you don't have that person to reflect what your experience is. Okay, go.
Yeah. Safety. We have generational trauma that we have to identify and allow ourselves to have this grace. It is ingrained in us, especially as Black women. We give birth to men and women. And as a mother, we have to provide that safety. And we've had our young boys murdered here in this land. We've had our daughters murdered here in this land. And so we have to hold and have really strict guidelines in our household for safety. And we carry that as the Mother Earth. And we think that it's not showing up, that we are able to hold this in quietly. However, we're not. Here's why. When we are holding this trauma inside and not processing it, it's impacting our health. Black women are the highest in having high blood pressure. We are the highest in obesity. We are the highest in heart attacks and strokes. And all of those health conditions are the number one component to unhealed trauma. We're holding it all in. So the data is there. We have to start processing it because it's killing us. It's a silent killer. And that's why these conversations have to be had, because we are carrying generational trauma. We are carrying our personal trauma, and we're not releasing it, and we're not healing it. We're not getting to this place of rest. So we're lopsided here. And it's impacting us in so many ways. So we have to ask ourselves, what's more important? Everything costs. Everything costs.
Yep. And that comes back to boundaries. It all comes back to boundaries. Like, all roads lead to making that internal decision that it's me, and I care for all y'all. Is me, or, well, no, that's it at this point, right? Like, you have to take care of yourself. And so much of my whole thing about rest is because when, I was this DEI, doing this DEI stuff, and I was comfortable, and I was making money, and I was feeling just I had a rhythm around my work, and I felt like, okay. And then when that was, but for the last 2 years, I've been like, okay, I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired. And the more things got harder in the world, the more anxiety people were laying on me. Right. And I'm like, okay, I think I got it. And then when it was gone, my initial reaction is to go into fear mode. But oh my God, the idea of the laying down the burdens of all of that energy, but I had to go through months of like this brain fog where I thought I had dementia, and I thought it was, and then the panic attacks. All of that was coming out. It had built up. And so I use this analogy that it's kind of like when you go on a roller coaster, you go to Disney World, Seattle Center, still think, okay, whatever. Go to Disney World or wherever, and you're on you get in and you're going up the hill, and you start because you're about to do that thing, right? And so you get up and you're imagine just staying there, and that's your normal, and you're just constantly like that wreaks havoc on the body, right? And so by the time I did my whoosh, there was panic attacks, there was brain fog, there was fatigue, like just I'm not getting out of bed today. I get out of bed and be like, good for you, girl. Right. You did it, right? That was the win. And so all of that, if it's locked in our bodies, it's going somewhere. And so getting back to your point about and so part of that rest is slowing down enough to even recognize that we're here all the time, right? So, and part of this manifests itself as anger and rage, and I'm fighting, and I'm a fighter, and everybody's, all of the stuff that we do. And now everybody's talking about what it'd be like to live that soft life. Girl, live that soft life, girl. None of this, I'm a, all of that. So how do we make that transition? So I'm excited to talk about that. In our next episode, we're talking about rest. We're talking about how to manage that fighter warrior spirit that has gotten us so far, but it may not be serving us when we're trying to just be and breathe. So that's what we'll be talking about next time. And I am so excited to talk about it with you. And thank you so much for being here. Any closing thoughts before we hop off?
Love yourself through discovery and healing, because this healing journey is going to be an amazing one, and everyone is so worth it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Michelle. Hey, we certainly hope you enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please do all the things you know to do on the socials. Like, subscribe, come back and join us. But above all, get rested.